Meet the perfect 10 in terror. Here's your relook at the McFarlane Toys movie Maniacs Series 5, Jason X, Uber Jason. Jason Voorhees, the hard-to-kill slasher, gets a techno twist in the New Line Cinema's film Jason X, which is set in the future. The hockey-masked killer in this long-running slasher series gets an upgrade set in the future of an uninhabitable Earth. Explorers find Jason's cryogenically frozen remains. He thaws, and the killing begins anew. Now, I love when I get viewer requests from you members of the mob. You guys kindly ask if I would be willing to re-review a figure, and if I still happen to have that figure, I'm more than happy to oblige. Got this request from viewer Corbin, who had asked if I would be willing to go back and have a look at the McFarlane Toys movie Maniacs Series 5, Jason X, Uber Jason. And like I said, I had the figure still, so of course, more than happy to oblige Corbin. During these scary times, of course, that we are facing right now as a community and as the world, it's sort of fitting as well that we're having a look at Jason X, a survivor who left planet Earth, sort of still in cryogenic freezing, of course, but he left an abandoned Earth, which is sort of where we are right now. A lot of the streets are vacant, and I want to thank every single one of you, yes, every single one of you out there that is taking the time, social distancing yourselves from everybody else, and staying at home where we should be. And if this is where you want to come and hang out and spend a lot of your time, again, I'm more than happy to oblige when it comes to re-reviewing things that I have in my collection. I made that whole opening really long, but again, I do really appreciate the fact that you guys are taking your time to come to this channel as a way of, again, dealing with the fact that you guys are currently at home right now. Needless to say, to you, Corbin, who had requested this, the movie Maniacs Series 5, Jason X stands exactly at 7 inches in height. Get a gander at that. Get also a gander at the fact that the figure stands 17.8 centimeters, so a little over 17.5 centimeters tall. Now, I sold Jason X one time before. I regretted it ever since, and ended up sourcing out and picking up another one through eBay, which I was able to find a decent enough price that it didn't completely break the bank. Since then, I think I will most definitely hold on to this, even eventually, knock on wood, the fact that we are now just bringing in, of course, NECA Toys. This is Friday the 13th, Part 4, the final chapter, Jason Voorhees, segueing to the fact that I hope we eventually see ourselves an ultimate version of Jason X, Uber Jason from NECA Toys. Of course, with the legal battle still ensuing with Friday the 13th, who knows when that will actually be settled out. But I gotta imagine that NECA Toys wants to continue to pop out new Jason figures, and collectors like myself are more than inclined to want to pick them up as they come out. So in the meantime, you sort of have to deal with this. These are two figures from two different companies and two different figure lines, but that's as best as we can certainly pull together right now. Obviously, they sort of stand out like sore thumbs. The NECA one, of course, on the left is much more articulated. We've had a look at those figures countless times before. Uber Jason, sadly, is relegated to about 4 points of articulation, so he's pretty Skimpsville. He is also staction, which means he pretty much is pre-posed for the most part, other than those few points that I just mentioned. But again, if you want to have an Uber Jason in your collection, this is currently how he would stack up if you put him with, say, one of the other Jasons that you might already have. Let's have a look at the accessories that come included with the figure. A smaller, scaled-down version of the movie Maniacs display stands with every single subsequent series, every single new wave of these. This poor stand has gotten smaller and smaller, and even smaller still. At one point, it was actually a full frame, and then the poster sat inside of it. Now, when we start looking at things like Series 5, we only really get this, which is basically a two-part piece. This part comes off, which now I've applied a fair bit of pressure to get this back into place, but essentially it just tabs in by 3 holes. I don't know why now it's giving me somewhat difficulty. There it is right there. See, 3 holes, 3 pegs. That's how it comes connected together. Of course, the stand is very crucial, so you wouldn't want to lose that, because that would give you the necessary means of actually having this standing up. Some skull work done on the side with a spinal cord. I like that. Just a really neat looking stand. Again, it's a shame that they really have shrunk down what we got with later waves. And of course, you've got the movie poster on the front. Who had seen this in theaters? Show of hands right over here. I saw this in theaters. It was just okay. It unfortunately came around the time of Scream's popularity, so they had to shoehorn some unnecessary humor in there. You got to believe if this was played more serious, how cool Jason X would have actually been. I sort of picture like Aliens. Aliens had humor, of course, in it, but if it was a little bit more like Aliens meeting Jason Voorhees, could you imagine how cool that actually would have been? The poster itself is split down the middle by his upgraded machete. On the one side, you've got regular Jason from the beginning of the film, and on the right, he gets his upgrade, his Jason Uber X upgrade. I personally loved the upgrade and would have loved to have seen additional sequels to that film. Of course, he does find his way down on a new planet. I think they most definitely could have churned out at least one other sequel. Maybe Jason X 2, Jason X Square, something clever along those lines. Anyways, the poster is very flimsy cardboard. I'm actually even surprised that it's still intact the way that it is. And it doesn't really even attach. It's just sort of slots in place. That's about as best as you can really get it. I thought you could kind of just press this against it, but it still leaves too much of a gap that the poster, like I said, does flop out. As you can see, it just doesn't really stay well enough in place. At least, I suppose, to the credit of the Series 5 stands, they're small enough that if you didn't like maybe and thought the other stands were a little bit too more obnoxious, these are a little bit smaller in style that you can just put them, like I said, just behind Jason. The next and only other thing he comes included with is his main accessory, his upgraded machete. To quote, of course, Professor Lowe, guys, it's okay. He just wanted his machete back. Oh, stupid Professor Lowe, you had no idea. Well, we of course saw what ended up happening with that, or we didn't really quite see what ended up happening with that. We'll just go ahead and move his stand out of the way. I'll show you guys what the machete looks like, completely in frame. It's painted out in something that you would imagine the T-1000 would actually have been able to craft. It's got a very intricate looking handle. And then from there, it's been airbrushed in a darker color of silver with a little bit of that running down below on the blade. It's a really neat looking weapon. Again, I keep looking at figures like this and imagining what it will look like when we eventually knock on wood. Is somebody at the door? No, somebody was just knocking on wood. When we eventually hopefully get ourselves the ultimate version from NECA Toys. I know that's a lot of weight putting on their shoulders. But you got to imagine that sooner or later it's going to happen. Getting the machete and just putting it into his hand, you sort of have to wiggle it, and it only goes on one hand. The other hand, as you can see, is solely for gripping and possibly putting somebody into liquid nitrogen, although it really wasn't, of course, this particular look of Jason that pulled it off. The machete does fit into his hand, but unfortunately, again, the big problem with this figure is he's really relegated to very limited posability. I did rhyme off 3 points, if I'm not mistaken, but there's actually technically 5, I believe, when you factor in the wrists. But there's a couple of ways that you can, of course, display it. There's this option, and then you can rotate the arm down. I suppose there's that option, and you can rotate the arm out this way. That looks a little silly. So you kind of get what I mean. They're like pretty much from the bicep onward is where you get a little bit of posability. But like because his arm just jets straight out at literally at a 90-degree angle, you're really unfortunately always putting him in a more museum pose. There's nothing much of else you can do with it. Yeah, you can bring his arms up. Yeah, sure, it looks a little silly, but at least I guess there's that. But like I said, don't worry, we'll talk a little bit more about the posability in a second. Let's go ahead and take the machete out of his hand. I'm sure by now everybody has seen Uber Jason. I'm Jason X, of course. I don't think by now I'm going to be spoiling anything for people that haven't seen the film. You can watch it if you want. I definitely would easily put it in my top 3 worst Jason Friday the 13th films. Technically, this wasn't even called Friday the 13th. They didn't have the rights to do it yet. Now, this one, of course, Uber Jason, sort of comes about because KM14 really brutally blows Jason away, knocking off limbs and killing him from what we believed. until, of course, the little nanites were able to rebuild him from scratch, filling in some of the areas that were destroyed and damaged by taking components around it. That sort of gives him this metal hide. The face sculpt on Uber Jason I quite liked in the film. Again, it was the highlights of what I thought was just an okay looking film. I think NECA Toys would have done a much better job, yes, in the sense that we would get a more posable version of Jason. But you got to give some credit to Todd McFarlane and of course, the team behind McFarlane Toys for giving us the only version of Jason X that we've actually ever gotten. There's been other collectibles, but certainly not a full-out, full-scale figure like this. The design of Uber Jason is very quite clever. You do get a vibe still that it's a hockey mask, and yet still being something quite completely different and futuristic. One thing I really liked about this particular mask was the way it sort of engulfed his head. You get sort of a brain-looking design of his face underneath. You got to imagine what that face actually would have looked like. But like the T-1000, it kind of looks like a T-1000's face hugger that sort of has latched its way onto Jason's face, giving us this design right here. Another thing I really liked about the design of the character in the film was that you saw both of his eyes in a very stark, blood-soaked red. It's a really different take of what we, like I said, would have already gotten with Jason in previous films. Some nice airbrushing done overall to the mask. You get a little bit of that additional red that's also been colored into the top section of his head, which we can see right there. Yeah, it does sort of just look like a big giant brain head, doesn't it? Some nice scale work also done to the side. You can really imagine how damaged that face would be had you be able to really actually remove this. I've seen some mask builders out there selling a Jason X mask, and I would love to add that to my existing hockey mask collection, because again, it's such a unique design for the character. As we look, of course, at the rest of his body, now it's comprised of sort of a two-face, two-tone effect. The one side, of course, is still the stretched fabric. It's a black costume, essentially a black bodysuit, with a cybernetic leg on one side and a cybernetic torso and arm on the other. Not only in the figure of Jason X do we actually get some nice metallic coloring done in the silver, but you can also see sort of now how the costume veins its way out, sort of spreading itself like a virus across that metal. I think that's a really neat looking touch. Keeping in mind how old this figure actually is, it's still a figure despite for shortcomings in posability. It's still a great looking sculpt figure. At one point I actually had conceived the idea of maybe buying a second one of these, and bear with me as I describe this. I would have actually tried to dismantle this guy and see if I could make him a more posable version. I quickly realized one of many things. The figure would be way too expensive to buy a second one of these, and I'm not nearly skilled enough, I think, to perform off such a feat. So I think I'm just going to leave it, hopefully in the comfortable hands of NECA Toys when that eventually happens. There I go, rhyming off NECA Toys again. Some nice detailing done also to the skin work on the side. It's been grafted here, and again, having that metal wrapped around it. This is what it looks like on the back of the figure. Again, there's a lot of cool elements being incorporated into this figure, especially like this little area here, where again, like you just feel like the fabric is sort of latching and moving its way across the body, sort of like the symbiote of Spider-Man's black costume. Lots of cool detailing done also to the side. The coloring of the figure has a slight hint of blue. Not sure, hopefully, if the camera's picking that up or not. It sort of looks like the side of a tree. Sort of kind of looks a little bit like bark on the tree, doesn't it? It's a close-up look detailing at it. Getting really neat design of the character. Kane Hodder apparently said that Jason X was one of the easier costumes to wear, because I think, again, he was able just to remove the faceplate. It wasn't as extensive and sort of conforming over his body. Again, like I said, he doesn't have a lot of posability to him, but I suppose he has what posability one would expect to get for a figure like this. He does have, for example, for his posability, I should say, his arms rotate all the way around. One thing that they at least did do was if you have the arm up like this, for example, this bicep piece of his arm does a nice job of hiding the seam line. See, if I shift it right there, you can see where that line, where the cut of the bicep allows the arm to rotate back and forth. Again, you can rotate the arm all the way around. That's pretty much all you're going to be able to get. The cybernetic hand also allows articulation right there. You can move this arm, and this is again one of those things with McFarlane's older movie Maniac figures, that you won't have symmetrical articulation on both sides of the figure. I mean, on this one side, you basically have just a full hinge joint, which allows the arms to rotate. On this arm, you don't get the exact same thing. You're getting a cut right on the bicep. The hand rotates all the way around. Of course, we didn't talk about the head articulation. That head also rotates all the way around, and it also swivels back and forth. There is no foot articulation, although rotating it, it sort of feels for a second like you can't actually rotate the feet. I think it's just mostly to the fact that the material that they used back in the day would have been more softer plastic, which does cause one little bit of difficulty when it comes to the figure to stand. If you have the arm too high up, or this arm too high up, the figure sort of teeters back and forth, at times maybe falling over. This one also, if you look on the underside, technically does have peg holes on the undersides of its feet. So in a way, you could actually make use of a display stand if you have worries that your Jason X is going to fall off your shelf. I haven't had that happen, knock on wood. I'm doing a lot of knocking on wood in this review, but you never know, it may eventually happen. So after this review, I might just take my own sound advice and maybe get myself a display stand to put underneath the figure's feet so the figure isn't going to fall right off the shelf. And that would make me very sad. It seems all the Friday the 13th films that I end up disliking the most, Part 8, Jason Goes to Hell, which I actually don't mind Jason Goes to Hell too much, and Jason X have the most standout looks for Jason Voorhees. Of course, there is Part 7, and that's a fan favorite design of Jason Voorhees, but you certainly got to give mad props to the fact that Jason sports a yellow mask in Jason Takes Manhattan, which is one of my favorite looks for Jason. He has a very interesting look in Jason Goes to Hell. Of course, he felt the need to tuck his shirt in. I always found that was interesting about Jason Goes to Hell. He tucked his shirt in. And then, of course, we have Uber Jason here from Friday the 13th. Not so much Friday the 13th, but Jason X, because, of course, they couldn't use the name Friday the 13th at the time. Jason has two distinct looks in the film. The more common look for Jason Voorhees, which, again, is still very different in itself because he does have an actual functioning eye. I always thought that was kind of strange. And then, of course, the more upgraded look of Jason that he gets later into the film. It's ironic as well that Jason travels off to space. Well, not by his own choices. He's carried off to space by the students that end up finding his cryogenically frozen corpse. But space seems to be the dying place where a lot of horror franchises end up going. Critters, Leprechaun, and of course Hellraiser 4 Bloodlines all travel off to the distant reaches of space. And all sort of ended up being films that considered by many to be real bombs. Personally speaking, I like Hellraiser 4 Bloodlines. It's my favorite from the franchise, so just saying that. But Jason X definitely by far is my least favorite Jason film. And the real standout piece of it is the fact that we have Jason looking like this, which we've never seen before, and we have never seen since. Jason X Square, I'm just going to call it, a sequel that could have potentially happened. Of course, he crash lands on another planet and more people that he could have killed. It never really ended up happening. And in a way, I would have been curious to see how Uber Jason would have worked on land instead of an actual space station, but we just sort of have to play what if. What if that could have actually happened? Anyways, Jason X bombed, unfortunately, in the theaters. It was shelved for the longest of times. New Line put it to the side for 2 years, I believe, and it ended up being a highly pirated film online. By the time the film actually came to theaters, I don't think anybody was really all that interested in checking it out. When they eventually did see it, like I saw it, the general reaction was it was too campy. Uber Jason was still pretty cool, but the film was just, it was okay. It was all right. I'm hoping, though, we will eventually see a resurgence in Jason X, not necessarily in a film, but certainly from a new figure from the folks over at NECA Toys. And while I didn't want this review solely to be all about what NECA could do better, NECA currently has the licensing lingering, of course, for Friday the 13th, so I'm sure when that licensing does free up again, I'm sure NECA will be continuing to want to put out ultimate versions of Jason Voorhees that come super articulated, have a little bit more accessories going for it. But until then, we have, of course, the movie Maniacs version of Jason X. Very finely crafted by McFarlane Toys, taking nothing away from what the team actually did to this figure. It's a really neat looking figure. If he only had more articulation and he wasn't so statue-like, you know, his arm always has to be up like that. What's that all about? If it wasn't for that, I think the figure could still be with your other Jason figures, but he sort of does stand out a bit. In the same way that the Cult Classics Part 7 Jason stands out. He's just way too big. So unfortunately, until we get a continuation of those Ultimate Jasons, this is the best and only means of getting a Jason X. So for obvious reasons, it's a figure I would recommend till eventually we do see, and let's hope it actually happens, an Ultimate Jason X. I would certainly love to see that happen. Neat looking design for Uber Jason. Love it or hate it, he's definitely different, and I like different. What do you guys think of this figure down below? If you've had this guy in your collection for the longest of times, let me know down below what you guys think of it, or based on this review and this review alone. I'd also like to send out a big thank you to Corbin, who took the time and contacted me and said, hey bro, I don't know if he actually said bro, but he said, hey, would you be willing to go back and have a look at the movie Maniacs? Movie Maniacs Series 5, Jason X Uber Jason. He didn't say it with all those periods in the middle of it. And I said, heck yeah, I still have that figure. I still love this figure. And you darn right, I'm going to re-review him, Corbin. That's probably not even what I said either. And that's what it's led to this dance here. He's a nice looking figure, like I said, but he's just a little limited on articulation. What do you guys think of the figure? Again, let me know down below in the comment section. If you are new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. If you are new to this channel, make sure you hit that bell notification. And gosh darn it, pardon my French, if you guys are new to this channel, keep your peepers peeled, because we're going to be having a look at some new stuff, some old stuff, some cool stuff. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.